Shall we start with this violence against women and girls strategy, which seems to hinge around this hypothesis that boys are catching misogyny off the internet? What do you think about it, Jonathan?
I think that we can't argue that misogyny is rising and that people like Andrew Tate have had a huge influence in the so-called manosphere over the last few years, and that a lot of teenage boys are very, very influenced by this culture of misogyny, this sort of pornification culture as well, which we've heard a lot about. And obviously, we hear a lot about young women and girls being harassed in the streets, and anything that can be done to try and curb that in some way as part of a general education, I think is to be welcomed. I don't see why we have to have sort of this either-or approach to pretend that young men and boys are not subject to some kind of online radicalisation, or they don't pose any threat to women and girls, and therefore it's just other people. I think that there should be... I suppose
the question is, how do we tackle it? I don't think there's any argument that it's happening, but are anti-misogyny lessons going to have any effect?
The problem that I think we all know what the debate is around this, and Badenoch has already talked about it, jumping on a bandwagon as usual, which is that it should be migrants that should be given these classes. I think that, first of all, you can separate two different issues. Young men in school are clearly being given all kinds of lessons, some of them good, some of them bad, from the world, and that if we can address that in some way through the education system. We always talk about how do we stop violence against women and girls. Obviously, education is one of those ways. And there might also be an issue with people from different cultures coming here and just helping them to understand some British laws and norms. I have no objection to that whatsoever. That happens in other countries. So I don't see why there has to be a cultural issue about this. This seems a very, very sensible way of tackling a very serious problem.
Yeah, Emma, what do you make of this? Because I think the government's very confused. They're very, very confused. They can't put... They didn't really know, a lot of them, what a woman was until the Supreme Court defined it. Now they're worried about actually abuse against women. It's like, well, tell us what you think a woman is, first of all, because it could be a man in their books.
Silly, Alex.
Well, it's true.
Silly, don't be silly. It's a serious issue,
come on. The Prime Minister couldn't even define what a woman...
silly, Alex, it's a serious problem, come on. And by the way, Alex, trans women are subject to all kinds of violence.
Hang on a minute, it's you two that are supposed to be fighting.
No, we two go back a long way.
Go on, Emma.
OK, well, I think that there are several points that can be made about this. The first is the government is completely incoherent when it comes to women's safety. You have Jess Phillips coming out and saying we need to do more to make sure that we eliminate, and which I don't think you can do, totally eliminate violence against women and girls. Very laudable thing to do, but you can't then have Bridget Phillipson basically blocking the High Court ruling, the rules coming in to do with protecting women's same-sex spaces. The second point, I think, is obvious, which is that you shouldn't be, in this negative way, targeting young boys by saying that there is something specific about young boys that is, malign or malevolent in some way. Instead, what you should be doing, which I think is legitimate, is for schools to teach children good manners. If their parents aren't teaching them that at home, good manners absolutely would solve the problem. But I don't think that attacking young boys in this way is going to be helpful at all. All it's going to do is cause more resentment. Young boys are already sort of bearing the brunt culturally at the moment. And I think the third point is that Kemi Badenoch is absolutely right. She's not jumping on a bandwagon. She's the leader of the opposition, and she's commenting on a very important issue. I think she's absolutely right to say that the issue isn't when it comes to the safety of women and girls. People like me are not walking down the street thinking, oh, an 11-year-old boy is going to do something terrible to me. We're walking down the street thinking an unvetted migrant who's come in, might do something terrible. But I think she's right to point out that if you have unvetted men coming in from countries that have regressive views on women, then you will have violence against women and girls. If you have no controlled immigration, women and girls are not safe.
But I think, Jonathan...
There's nothing more important than keeping your money and your identity safe online. And with so many VPN options available, choosing the right one can be pretty daunting. But this video's sponsor, ExpressVPN, is making the choice easier for GBNews viewers. ExpressVPN is offering up to 75% off, plus 4 extra months free. That's top-level security from just £2.49 a month, and you're covered by their 30-day money-back guarantee. So just click the link in this video's description or scan the QR code now. Remember, when you're online, you are often sharing personal data, so hackers can steal your information, your passwords, your photos, and your bank details in just seconds. But ExpressVPN encrypts your connection, making it virtually impossible for hackers to access your personal information. So why choose ExpressVPN? Well, it couldn't be easier to use. With just one click, you are protected. And ExpressVPN uses military-grade AES 256 encryption, which is the same standard trusted by the US government to guard their classified information. With their new tiered plans, you can protect up to 14 devices at once and manage passwords securely. Live chat support is available 24/7, and it typically connects you in under a minute with a real person. Click the link in this video's description or scan the QR code to get up to 75% off ExpressVPN, plus 4 months extra for free. Start protecting yourself today with ExpressVPN.
I think it's right to say that these are two separate, but I think equally serious problems. I mean, I absolutely wouldn't argue with you about the impact of some very conservative Islamic cultures and the impact that has on misogyny. But I also think, yes, are you worried about an 11-year-old boy? No. But the pornification of culture, how that is making boys and men behave, or what they think is sexually normal compared to in previous generations. 40% of young women under 35 have been strangled during sex, compared to 5% of over 60.
It's about
so it's changing massively behaviour.
I completely agree. I mean, they are two separate issues, but they're combined in the issue.
Yeah, the government is combining them.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think, the issue is partly things like violent porn, the loss of manners.
Can I just say this on pornography? Because I hear this a lot. Actually, a lot of young women have also believed that things like strangulation is exciting in the bedroom. So sometimes I just wonder, and listen, I agree generally with trying to tackle this issue. I just wonder whether actually are British boys more misogynistic than they were, let's say, in the 1980s or the 1950s or the 1960s? Is this really as bad as it was back then, or are we living through the best times ever and Labour MPs have been watching too much adolescence?
It's different. In the 1950s, obviously, women often didn't go out to work. Women had a very, very kind of narrow circumscribed views, circumscribed sort of roles in the household, etc. Now, obviously, it's different, and that has fed into a backlash where people like Andrew Tate say, actually, we need to be men again, and women need to be women, and what women need to be women is basically being their sort of sexual slaves and not working, not having freedom and agency. That's a problem.
That's a very fringe part of this conversation.
It's not a fringe part. It's not a fringe part.
I was on a train the other day. And sitting in the table opposite me was 3 or 4 white British boys who were, I would say, about 14. They were talking in loud voices, no attempt to hide their conversation, but what they wanted to do to their friend's mother in graphic, pornographic language. Now, that didn't happen in the 1980s. It just didn't, because they didn't have access to the kind of material that would allow them to...
But I think this is part of the moral fragmentation of society more broadly. I think it's the breakdown of, and it sounds very old-fashioned to say, but decorum, manners between the sexes, a sense of what is acceptable and what is not to talk about publicly, a sense of, you see this with OnlyFans, the kind of crassification of public discourse, the sorts of things that people will reveal online, post online. I mean, it's part of this much bigger picture. But I think when it comes to the safety of women and girls more broadly, I think Kemi Badenoch is right to point to the fact that allowing loads of unvetted migrants, illegal migrants, to come into the country and then placing them in local communities and housing them near schools is much more of a risk to women than... But I'm not saying it's not.
And this government also pushed very hard to ensure there was no national inquiry into grooming gangs. As I said, they've got the puberty blockers trial of children.
Why are you conflating completely different issues?
Absolutely.
And by the way,
how are they different?
Obviously, talking about migrants and talking about puberty blockers and children are demonstrably different issues, Alex. And by the way, people like you, Alex, people like you, we kept on talking about the Cass review and using the Cass review. And by the way, I think you have some slightly strange views on trans, because in private you've said that you're actually quite in favour of letting people live. So it's interesting that on
people to live their lives. I just don't
live and let live. Live and let live is what you always say in private, Alex.
Let's just be clear about something, because we talk about my private views, and the audience, absolutely, all my views are very, very public. So I'll say this, what I've said to everyone else. After the age of 18, do what you want. I don't care, as long as it doesn't impact my life, and you don't force me to change the way I live, and you don't go after children.
No one's trying to force the way you live.
Well, they are. They're trying to force men to go and allow men into women's toilets. all. That's absolutely a change of way people live and a changing.
Can I just defend?
It is all the same.
I would like to defend your position here because I don't think that these are two separate issues. You can't separate the issue of trans never mind same-sex spaces, but even things like puberty blockers, early transition, you can't separate that from women's safety issues. I mean, there are lesbians who have said that with children in particular, that transitioning children is basically a form of conversion therapy because a lot of those children would just turn out to be lesbians. So you can't, I mean, yes, they are separate issues, but if we're talking about under the umbrella of women's safety and about sex-based rights, you can't separate those issues out. They are significant parts of the debate in this country when it comes to women's rights.
Hilary Cass, under whose umbrella people on the gender critical side have used as a kind of a weapon to attack their opponents, has applauded this move, and she called for it herself to have a trial to establish the validity of these puberty blockers. So people can selectively applaud and endorse Cass when it suits them. I think that is wrong.
You're allowed to agree with some.
Then let's just agree with any of it then.
We are going to have